Okay, so for social studies today, we're doing a character story about citizenship. So like I've been doing in the past, I'm going to read the article, the story for you, and then you can either answer the questions with me or on your own and then come back to the video and check your answers. And then after, we're going to read a book about a girl who loves her country and wants to help others. Okay, so let's get started. Make sure you're following with your finger or a pencil as I read. Citizenship. Citizenship is being a good member of your community, following rules, and helping others. There are many ways to show citizenship. Chris was a busy kid. He had school every day and sports after school. On weekends, he got to play and have fun, but once a month, his family liked to volunteer. They picked up trash outside, or they helped an elderly neighbor fix up their house. It was hard work, but Chris felt good about making his community a better place. Shelley was a Girl Scout. She liked getting her badges. She had a whole bunch of them sewn on her sash. Her favorite badges to get were the ones that required helping people. She put a smile on someone else's face, and people could always use help. Shelley was a good citizen. How do you show citizenship? Okay, so now it's the questions. Number 1. Whose family volunteers on weekends? Is it A. Shelley, B. Rob, C. Chris, or D. Rachel? Now, if you don't remember, you could go back into your story and look at the first story we talked about. So our first story was about Chris, and he said on weekends he got to play and have fun, but once a month his family liked to volunteer. So whose family volunteers on weekends? Was it Shelley, Rob, Chris, or Rachel? It was C, Chris. Number 2. Who gets badges for helping out people? A, Shelley, B, Rob, C, Chris, or D, Rachel? So we know it's not Chris, so you can mark that off your list since Chris volunteers on weekends. Now, if you remember, badges were for someone who was in Girl Scouts. So we can mark Rob off the list because he's not part of Girl Scouts. So we have Shelley and Rachel left. If you can't figure it out then you could go back into your story and read on the first sentence. Shelley was a Girl Scout. She liked getting her badges. So who got badges for helping out people? A, Shelley. Shelley was a good A, boy, B, citizen, C, player, or D, student. Now think about what we're talking about. We're talking about citizenship. So she was a good what? Boy, citizen, player, or student? Shelley was a good B, citizen. Number 4. Chris feels good about helping in his community. Is this true or false? This is true. I can show citizenship by. Now think of a way you can show citizenship by. In this time right now, there's many ways we could help other people out. One way I helped somebody out was my aunt wasn't feeling good at one point. So I went and brought her some groceries so she didn't have to go to the store, which was very nice. And then you know what? She did the same to me, and she decided to get me some groceries the following week when she was feeling better. So that's how we help each other. So talk about it with your family and see how you can you can show citizenship. We're going to watch the book Grace for President. In this book, the girl Grace, the main character, finds out there's never been a woman president. So she decides that she wants to run for president. So we see her determination and her courage to become president, but through it we see how she could help others and how she wants to be a good citizen. So I hope you enjoy.
Grace for President. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? That is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl president? Ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls? Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. Yes, Grace. I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to be president. Several students in the class laughed. Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. The snickering in the room stopped. Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Mrs. Barrington asked the class. Nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I have invited Mr. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school's spelling bee champion. His experiments always took a blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be so easy after all, Grace thought. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat. Everyone except for Grace and Thomas got to choose a state. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 16 mean? Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. That number is determined by how many people live in that state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270? Asked Rose. That's more than half of all the electoral votes, Mr. Waller said. Becoming president really wasn't going to be so easy, Grace thought. Grace came up with a campaign slogan. Make history! Vote Grace Campbell for president! Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan. Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job. Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. A peaceful school, no bullies. A cleaner school, no littering. Better hot lunches, no more fish stick tacos. Thomas made up his own list of promises. Free tutoring, free soccer lessons, fish stick tacos every week. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. Each week, the teachers set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. I'm Thomas Cobb, and I approve this Campbell and help make a change for the better. Thank you. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. Grace continued to campaign. At recess, she gave speeches. Let's make history at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. During lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. After school, she held rallies. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated that the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment. After school, he played soccer. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad. She organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to approach the microphone. The Yellowhammer State of Alabama cast its 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb. Yay, Tom! Fletcher said, the last frontier state of Alaska cast its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb. Hannah called out, the Grand Canyon state of Arizona cast its 11 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. And so it went. State after state after state cast their electoral votes. The scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger State of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still unaccounted for. Wyoming. Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. Sam didn't say a word. What are you waiting for? Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The equality state of Wyoming casts its 3 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and a few boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. Why did you do it? She asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. Because, he said, I thought you were the best person for the job. The following week, students in Mrs. Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
I hope you enjoyed learning about citizenship.